The following podcast is brought to you exclusively by the Rad Rob Radio Network. He's a member of wrestling royalty. His repertoire and skills in the ring are unmatched. He's always been loyal, trustworthy, and has a work ethic that is unparalleled. He's been bashed by his peers, by the media, and even by the fans. But he's living proof that our worst days do not define us, and neither can other people. Welcome to Rebuilding the Foundation with Teddy Hart.
Hey guys, welcome back to Rebuilding the Foundation with Teddy Hart. This is episode number 5, and I am your host, Rad Rob, Rob Francois, joined by the man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Mr. Teddy Hart. Good evening, Teddy.
Rob, thanks so much for your patience and continued loyalty for this project. We've had some little hiccups along the way, and most guys run for the hills when there's any type of problem. So thanks for your tenacity, my friend. And thanks so much for letting my guests come on short notice like this. This guy, to me, has done a lot just recently to help me kind of get my confidence back that there's some people in the MMA world that are non-biased and that they go on athleticism and they go on history and they go on facts, and they're not, hate to say it, in that wrestling fan group, which I don't like stereotyping, but seems like there's a lot of people that would rather believe negative and have no affinity to any old school qualities of loyalty or trust or respect, or guilty when proven guilty instead of guilty and then proven innocent later, which doesn't count even, because even if you're innocent later, you're still guilty because of the way these people work. And he was very clear-minded and very knowledgeable about my grandfather and that type of history and the type of training that goes involved being a real shooter. And that's what I've always wanted to say. I mean, people didn't realize I always wanted to be an MMA fighter and a shooter and a boxer, not a fucking pro wrestler. But it was like, well, by the time I'm 19 or 20, I'm already stuck. I'm the youngest guy in the world to sign and be fired. And now I got this reason to chase this fucking dragon. I had a feeling was an impossible dragon to catch because of what had happened with Brett and Owen, and the situation obviously with Davey after that passing, and then Brian Pillman passing, and the whole situation, obviously my grandfather and that. But it was just like back to back to back to back to back death. And you don't find a lot of guys after that are real, in my eyes, that want to become friends. And usually they have friends in high places and all these other people in another sport that's completely different and based on actual real competition, instead of being based on some guy in the fucking back with a pencil and he writes the decision of who I am and how cool I am and what I have to do. And then I got to be a robot character wearing a little pair of weird shorts, running around the ring, dancing around and playing the fairy tale game of wrestling, where most of those guys are just wrestling for a fantasy. If you're doing the indie shows, and it's not like WWE where you're cultivated and protected and brought up, like I say, through the system. Teddy Hart was left to the wolves to die, and after getting killed so many times, I'm now like a ghost. And then this gentleman was nice enough to give me some respect, and he wasn't so scared to go on a podcast with me. So Jack Kirby bit the bullet. Hannibal, up and down like Hannibal quite a bit, still an old friend, and I know he's got an issue with his girlfriend or whatever being an anti-Teddy Hart guy or whatever. She believed the hype from that documentary about my behavior, which is completely untrue, but whatever. So Matt, obviously my brother is passed away now, but I think my brother Matt's up in heaven watching, because some of the people that have come in my life recently, I think of them as types of angels. That my grandfather's up there with a big smile on his face with all the other guys, and they're going, well, with that little voice, look at Teddy, finally found a couple real shooters to roll around with. After they choked the shit out of him a few times on the mat, he'll become one of them. And I was like, well, you know what, if initiation's that bad that Mr. Connecticut is going to teach me a few things on the mat, I'm down to get choked out and down to get initiated into the shoot world. I don't think I'll be a shoot fighter or I'll have an MMA fight, but I'm definitely trying to get back into at least 1 or 2 boxing matches. And I think this gentleman not only enters my life at this stage as a friend, someone with some nuts, your man of your word and your balls in my eyes. And I tried to display that type of energy and that type of integrity and that type of trait or characteristic in an athlete or a hero or a brother for you to believe in. That Teddy Hart was absolutely fearless all this time, and the only thing I fear now is being alone and having no friends because people tried to blackball me and make me look like such a prick. That having somebody come at this side is such a valuable lesson for me, and you really appreciate when you're down who doesn't kick you in the teeth. And this team of people that I've now surrounded myself with seems to be really, really positive for me, and they have a lot of outside connections and all sorts of things that I'm interested in doing. So I just want to say thank you so much for having the nuts to come on here with me and to associate yourself with the most dangerous man on the planet. I guess they say I'm the most dangerous breed of human they've ever seen. So it's like I'm a pretty exotic tiger with fluffy fur and a lion shave, and you can pet me anytime you want. Like I say, scratch my whiskers though, because then I have this special skunk venom that comes out of my fucking eyes because I'm such a dangerous species that, I'm going to hypnotize you then to think of me as a normal person and not judge me for shit I never did. And if the cops said I didn't do it and the fucking detectives and Homeland Security and everyone else we know said impossible, I just hope that the people in the fantasy world of friendship, something that is built on time, trust, and energy. And I took 20 years to trust the fans, and they turned on me fairly quickly. And I do have guys that I haven't really been able to say much to except through this podcast. So thank you, and thank the world for providing me this platform. And thank you for giving me some new friends, man. It's a lonely, lonely world out there. And the most valuable thing besides your time and free choice is your friends and your family. So,
Dude, I mean, look, I'm just glad to be a small part of it. I mean, whatever I can do. I told you when I saw your interview with Jasmine St. Clair, and I said, man, I knew about your history. I knew about your, a little bit about your career. I knew some of the stuff that you had gotten involved to, being arrested and all that. But, listening to you talk to her, I said, man, this guy, I told you, man, you either have to be a complete sociopath or he's literally telling the truth because your story never changes. And you're so confident when you talk, and you can usually tell when somebody's lying to you. I mean, you could tell by facial tics or any kind of different weird stuff that you do, but you don't have any of that. I mean, I'm also a poker player, so I'm pretty good at reading people and studying body mechanics and body language and all that. And I realize that you're the real deal. But before we get off on a tangent here, let's bring in our very special guest. He is the king of Connecticut. He's a podcast extraordinaire. He's involved in many, many different things. He's a lawyer. He deals with MMA and boxing. He's Teddy. In one word, describe him in one word.
Well, it's going to break down into 3 real motherfucker. That's a real gangster. That's a real G. I've been around the street. I came from the street. I made my money on marijuana while everybody else was doing, I guess, chemicals from under their sink. Most of the morons out there that don't understand there's drugs you can do and there's drugs you can't. I've been a weed guy for years, and I had to quit weed for 6 years. So you really appreciate guys that come into this world, especially from MMA or wrestling, that are clean, smart, articulate, loyal, and they have, like I say, an opinion that's not going to be swayed by bullshit. They go on facts, what you see and what you hear, and what you hear face to face, not what you hear from somebody else describing someone else's characteristics or someone else as a man. I would think that's crazy. In a court of law, hearsay is something that's not considered at all, and second-hand or third-hand information, considering it comes from erroneous sources or liars or guys that are being paid for a specific type of opinion or narrative. It's really bad. So 3 words, yeah, real motherfucker, this guy, and also a new friend, which again to me has got the most value, and the curiosity of wondering what he's going to bring into my world and what I can do for him. And that's the synergistic effect of putting 1 or 2 or 3 people together, and all of a sudden something else comes out of that, and that's love and respect and time. And if you put that love, respect, and time into an objective, then you're going to watch what I manifest, which is going to be something pretty scary, guys, because you guys tried to take my head off. You tried to slit my throat, and you tried to shoot me in the head a few times. And I've been nice to WWE because I love Stephanie McMahon, and I love Shane McMahon, and I love Vince McMahon. And I don't know Linda McMahon at all, but I've met Shane numerous times and met Stephanie a few times. And Vince I met probably 6 or 7 times in my life, and I've wrestled for him, I think, when I was a kid at 15 years old. And being from Connecticut, I hope that somehow, some way, people understand this is a guy from Connecticut. This is a guy who has friends everywhere, high, low, all over the world on all levels. And he's saying, you know what? I don't believe anything unless I do the homework on it. I'm a lawyer, I'm well versed, and I'm pretty smart. I'm going to understand this case of yours and the situation after I get into it. So now he's got into it a bit. And one sad thing that happened was we were supposed to have this match with Phil Baroni, and that's how this whole thing started. Was if you're babysitting Phil Baroni, and Phil Baroni's an animal and a very tough guy and a very connected guy and well respected amongst a certain type of people that stick together and they don't leave a man behind. And thank God I met Phil and had a wonderful experience with him. And so down the road, that's the way Mother Nature works, or God works. And I had Stephan Bonner and Phil Baroni on the show, and Phil Baroni and Stephan Bonner are very good friends with this gentleman here. And thank you, Stephan, for being up in heaven and making this happen too, because everybody, like I say, energy can't die, especially good energy, and these guys have good hearts. And that's what I noticed about Stephan Bonner and about Phil Baroni and about most of the guys in MMA, that every one of these guys has a different mentality, and they're not jealous of each other like the wrestlers are, because they don't are. There's a difference of competing for a sport that you're going to win or lose, and there's a direct decision that's made. Once that decision's made, it's winner or loser, or it's a draw, but everybody walks away at the same thing with that respect. As a wrestler, for some reason, you don't look at the other guy as a teammate, and you look at him as competition. Yet I got to put my life between his legs or between his hands or in his control, and hope he doesn't break my neck or drop me on my head. And that's the risk, like I say, being in wrestling, dealing with jealous types of people. So I always wanted to get out of the wrestling world for picking my friends, and I wanted to break into the wrestling world, or break into the shooter world, but I didn't really know how to do it. So Kenny Lester had kind of taken me under his wing, and then he'd introduced me to some guys, and Jake Shannon started doing some stuff, and Harry started doing some stuff, some shoot stuff, and then Jack Kirby started doing some stuff, and all of a sudden I found out the guy behind everything, or the architect of most of this, was Mr. Connecticut here. And so I was like, well, please, if I'm going to go to the source of the information, or the source of the power and the connections, if you guys don't mind passing his number on to me, I'd like to try to talk to him about my life and about my comeback, and not so much as a wrestler, but just as a person in society that wants to be able to go to a UFC show, for example, or wants to be able to go to Boca Raton and hang out with some of these guys at their mansions, because it's a small group of people and they only have the friends that they want around that are trusted, loyal, and tried, tested, and true, which is an important thing, which after a while you get a reputation. And if I don't have time to make my reputation, then give me a little time to get to know me, and then you can make a intellectual decision after that if I'm a guy you want on your team or not. And all I ask for is time. And this guy's been extremely kind, patient, and he knows I like to talk a lot at the beginning when I first get to know someone, so they know who I am and what I stand for. And then if the story changes and you hear little things down the road, master listeners listen, and I catch bullshit and changes on stories all the time, or exaggerations. And you slowly start to wean those types of people out as being full of shit or not trustworthy. And if I can make sure, this next 5 years of my life, that I surround myself with the right people. And Teddy Hart's always been real and very, very honest. If anything, that's been my worst thing, is being too honest, because the truth hurts. And people are scared of all the stuff I really do know and that I don't talk about. I've seen a lot of crazy shit, and I'm not out there to bury anybody right now. I'm not there to tell these negative stories or to bitch about guys or to talk about wrestling in a negative capacity, because my dream was to make people happy. And my gift certificate to God when I go to heaven is that I got thousands of people all over the world that were sitting on their asses doing nothing. They weren't even smiling. They were just a blank canvas. I made sure they got up, they clapped their hands, and they smiled. And that's positive energy. That energy goes straight to purgatory and gets me out of there a little early for all the other crazy shit I've done on earth, because you got to balance. And the consequence for me is jumping in the ring and risking my life. That's my cleanse. If God thinks I'm still cool, then he leaves me safe walking the earth. Instead, if he thought I was some punk, I'd be in a wheelchair, or I'd be dead like most of the guys that came before me that didn't understand the rule of it's not who you are in the ring, it's who you are on the street. And who you are in the ring, sure, you may be a nice guy in the street when you're getting paid for an autograph, but you know what? When no one's around, God's watching more carefully than anything. And a lot of the guys, I think, in wrestling forgot that rule. So I always say it's the street credibility that protects you in the ring. And if you're a spoiled baby and you think you're better than everybody else because you're a pro wrestler, then you know what? Go get yourself fucked. Put on a pair of MMA gloves and some shooter shoes, and not one of those little pair of shorts, but a nice looking gi, and roll around on the mat with some jiu-jitsu guys, or catch a guy like this guy and ask him if you want to see what it's like to get put in a nice little chokehold or an ankle lock, or one of the shooters, they have all these ankle rides and different holds. It's like, man, these are the guys that are real, and these are the guys that the wrestlers all want to be. So again, just thank you again. And for Matt, if it's possible, I have my friend Matt next month that he wants to come down to meet everybody, and he's an MMA fighter from Canada, and I'm hoping to introduce him and see if I can get him to do maybe my first or second, where I'm just depending on how I work my thing. I want to do a couple fight cards, hoping like a bare knuckle boxing match, stripper pole competitions type of thing, arm wrestling, a bench press competitions, types of things where it's not just a wrestling show, it's a circus type of show, and it's like a once a month type of thing, and you create a few different options or avenues for entertainment for these people. And that's another thing I'm going to be running by Mr. Connecticut after we get off this call. So,
well, without further ado,
Matt,
it's been 20 minutes, so let's finally have him get a word in here. King of Connecticut, thank you very much. Well,
that's your fucking fault. Why ask me?
It is.
That's your fucking fault, you bastard. You know I'm fucking prone to talk way too much at first, and I don't want to, you ask him, talk to him. Don't talk to me.
No, you're right. I asked you to describe him in one word, and you described him in 45,000 words, so that's fair. King,
real motherfucker turns into so much, dude.
Right. Fuck. Real motherfucker, King of Connecticut, welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. When we had Teddy on Old School Shooters, I read a poem. It's one of my favorite poems that I think it kind of sums things up. In the crazy world that we're in today, it kind of sums things up with Teddy and the crazy situations that he finds himself in today. And I wanna recite that poem for your fans, and that poem is: in men whom men condemn as ill, I find so much of goodness still. In men whom men deem half divine, I find so much of sin and blot. I hesitate to draw the line between the two where God has not. And I want people to take a moment and kind of reflect on that and those words, and think about the crazy world we live in today with this cancel culture and this phony hypersensitivity. And then think back to, and I have a very special place in my heart, no pun intended, with the Hart family, because his grandfather, Stu Hart, is part of it. I have a very special place in my heart for professional wrestling. And the reason for that is wrestling was my sport. My sport growing up through high school. I headlined a fundraiser at my old high school in Norwalk, Connecticut. I'm coming back to headline another fundraiser in the fall, and through college. And that's what got me into judo. And back in those days, don't want to date myself, that can give you a carpal tunnel, but it was the days when we wrestlers dominated judo, when you could still attack the legs from a standing, and I dominated judo. And you can hear some of those stories in my podcast that I did with Dan Severn down at Berman Law Group. A lot of the folks will know Dan, had him in studio, great friend of mine. And wrestling for me has a special place because I got into doing professional wrestling coming out of shooting, and my mentor and a guy who was like a second father to me was a guy that could stretch you like a rubber band. His name was Billy Wicks, Pops. Came out of the Memphis territory, came out of the Carnies, came out of collegiate wrestling before that. He was a guy not unlike Teddy Hart's grandfather, Stu. And he since passed on. And he was one of the inspirations for this book I did when I was training at Combat Submission Wrestling back 16, 17 years ago with Eric Paulson. We did Rough and Tumble, the history of American submission wrestling, because a lot of folks don't understand mixed martial arts, no holds barred. They came out of professional wrestling. And anyone who disrespects carnies or disrespects professional wrestling, to me, I'll stretch them like a rubber band. And what Pops told me in doing professional wrestling is, he said, and I did professional wrestling in the indies too, I did it more as a hobby. He said, you tell every one of those fat slobs.
Hear him, Rob?
This is important, Teddy. He said, you tell every one of those fat slobs, there's not a damn thing that you do in that ring to your opponent that you couldn't easily do to them. And it was true. And that's what professional wrestling is. And we need to bring a pride back to professional wrestling, the pride that the Hart family had, the pride that Stu Hart had, the pride that has been lost today in professional wrestling. And that's why he mentioned Jake Shannon. That's why it's been a privilege for me to work as business development manager and broadcaster with Jake Shannon. And one of the last things that Stephen Bonner did before he died is a commercial that he starred in with Forrest Griffin that I produced for Stephen and Forrest about Shoot Pro Wrestling. And I want to encourage fans to watch that commercial. And I want to encourage fans to watch what we're going to be doing with Shoot Pro Wrestling, because we're bringing it back to what professional wrestling really is. And
Rob,
one of the worst things that ever happened to professional wrestling, in my view, is when these fans wanted to try to be the bookers. You get those fans in the ring and you stretch them like rubber bands, and you send them back and with a story of how hurt they got in that ring. And that ring is a sacred place. The marks should be in the stands, not in the ring. And I know that that's the true nature of professional wrestling. And I want to go to my book, if I could, to Rough and Tumble. And I want to read a couple of passages that I have marked here. One of those passages out to Gokur's gym. And I want to read this passage from Gene LaBelle's Forward, because it's about Teddy's grandfather. And this is from the Rough and Tumble book, which you can get directly from me. You can buy signed copies. You can message me on my Instagram, king.of.Connecticut spelled out, or on my Facebook, Matthew J. Granahan. I have the maximum amount of friends, but you can follow me and message me directly, and I will arrange to send you a signed book. And I want to read this from Gene LaBelle, because this is very telling. I met a lot of great grapplers in the world of professional wrestling, men like Lou Thez, Vern Gagne, and Stu Hart. Years ago, when I published my first book on finishing holds, Stu Hart and family were with me at the Cauliflower Alley Club. I gave Stu a copy of the book. Stu knew finishing holds, and I considered this a great compliment. I've always believed that in martial arts, you need to go through different teachers and take the best features from each instructor that you visit. So he said that Stu was staring at his book and he told someone, get away, when they came by. That was Gene LaBelle, the late great Gene LaBelle. Speaking of the late great Stu Hart. And then I want to jump to another passage from the book. This is from Stu Hart's chapter, so people really understand Stu. Stu Hart was trained under Gold Dust Trio member Toots Mondt. Stu went on to form Stampede Wrestling, and Stu Hart, patriarch of the legendary pro wrestling Hart family, was born in 1915 in Saskatchewan, Canada. Hart played football for the Edmonton Eskimos in 1938 and 39, and he began his amateur wrestling career after joining the Edmonton YMCA in 1929. Hart captured a gold medal in the welterweight division from the AAU in Canada. In 1940, Hart captured the Dominion Athletic Wrestling Championship as a lightweight. Hart also served as director of athletics in the Canadian Navy during World War II. So this is all from my book, Rough and Tumble, about the legendary Stu Hart.
Teddy, did you ever get a chance to meet Judo Gene LaBelle?
You know what? I got a book of Judo Gene LaBelle's finishing holds, and that helped me. And Tyson Kidd and I used that book, and we used probably about 10 of his submissions in our new wrestling style because he had so many cool submissions that we hadn't seen yet. And like a submission for wrestling is not so much that the hold. Like I said, we want it to work, but it's the fact that no one had seen any of these, so it made us look a lot more versed in shoot fighting than what we actually were. But then we got started studying that book, and it gave me a whole bunch of new offense. I never got to meet the gentleman, and it's something that I know that I was told a few different stories about him by my grandfather when I was younger, and they were always very complimentary and of how tough Gene LaBelle was, and that he was responsible for a lot of people and Hollywood and breaking the door and getting the shooters the respect of being the top martial artist level of the world because they're the ones that could beat the karate guys. Bruce Lee had trouble, all these Steven Seagal. I heard a few different stories, but that Gene LaBelle was an absolute fucking killer. And my grandfather, he was a killer. He always talked about killing people with kindness, but down in the dungeon, it was all about the lesson you learned and if you could hold your breath. The compliment my grandfather gave me was he showed me a lot of stuff about shoot fighting, but he never stretched me personally or choked me out because everybody usually that got stretched went to sleep.
Right.
And I really feel like getting choked out to being unconscious. It was just like a personal thing. And he said to me that was a compliment. And he never knew. He's like, I don't know why I never got you down there and did more with you to choke you out or put you through the ringer. And I said, oh, well, because, probably the last guy in the world you want to have as an enemy, fucking. I said, I wouldn't appreciate being choked out and being humiliated down on the mat. He goes, oh, it's not a humiliation thing. It's a sign of respect. But at the same time, he goes, everything you do in the ring is so crazy. He goes, I'm going to give you a pass because the stuff you do in the ring, no one else is doing safely. And that looks like you studied something. So maybe you should have been in the basement more studying the shoot fighting part of it. But I understand the roof restrictions in the basement. I said, yeah, well, there's no room to do anything in the basement. So I study the shoot fighting when I'm in the basement. But my dad bought me a ring from my grandfather and put it in the house. And my dad made sure that there was enough space. So he cut the legs off it so I could climb to the top ropes and start doing, all the different moves and different dives and stuff combined with my technical aspect of wrestling, which came from, a few different sources. But I put that Gene LaBelle book as one of the major things that changed my career as opening my eyes for what the possibilities of shoot holds were that you could use and what I could use for self-defense in case the guy got a little slick in there and I had to calm him down, which I've had to do a few times with wrestlers over the years where they thought they were going to get cute. And then all of a sudden they realized pound for pound, hand strength and all of the different things. I have little keys and tricks my grandfather showed me and a few other guys over the years, Ken Shamrock or Dan Severn. Been in the ring with a lot of guys, a lot of black belts and Kurt Angle. And so, down the road, people started catching on that my submission game was what was so valuable about me. My grandfather gave me the pass. And then years later, my grandfather, he was old at this time, very old, and he was near his death, and he had fallen down near the toilet, and he hit his head on the scale, and he was knocked out cold. And this dog came running in the room, and it pissed on the floor right beside me. And I never liked this fucking dog, and I always remember if I caught the dog pissing, I would grab it, I would discipline the dog, and send it outside. And my grandfather always said, oh, don't worry, it's an old dog. Who cares? The fucking cats are pissed everywhere anyway. So I said, no, whatever. So I always had a goddamn little hatred towards this dog. But this dog woke me up, and I was so mad to catch it pissing. It pissed right beside my fucking bed. And I said, that motherfucker, that dog, what kind of balls that dog? I said, I jump up out of the dead sleep. The dog fucking runs for his life. He's not actually running for me. He's running to show me where my grandfather is. And my grandfather is bleeding on the ground, passed out. And I go to pick him up, and he looks at me, and he goes, God damn it. I said, what? Are you okay? He goes, just leave me here. And I said, not a chance. I said, Stu, I said, I know you're, I said, Grampy, I said, I know you're tired and everything. I know you've lost your wife, and how sad he was. And he said, I lost my wife, and I miss my wife. I just want to join her in heaven. And I said, not right now, you're not. I said, that to me is a form of suicide. I said, you can get up, you're going to get up. And he goes, no, just leave me here. He goes, I've lived a wonderful life. And I said, and that's not the ending for Stu Hart. And he goes, oh. So I picked him up. He's like, 260 pounds, and pick him up and carry him back, and I get him back on the toilet. You can see the blood just dripping down his eye, and he wipes the blood off. And he goes, oh God, I guess you're right. I said, Helen wouldn't want to see you go out like this. I said, you deserve to have a better ending than this. He goes, well, I guess there's a reason I never choked you out. I said, yeah, if I was choked out and I was mad at you for choking me out, I hold a grudge. I said, I probably would have left you there in a pile of your blood and pissed to fucking die on the ground there. I said, but you're such a good person. I said, I'm not having it on my clock. I'm not having it on my clock that Stu Hart died while I was in the fucking house on his toilet seat, fell and I said, so I picked him up and wiped him off. And he goes, well, I guess maybe later, about, an hour and a half later, 2 hours later, he's back up on his feet. He's having a cup of tea down in the kitchen, and he looks at me and he goes, I guess there's a reason I didn't choke the shit out of you. He probably would have left me right there. And I said, oh yeah. And I just kind of laughed. I remember always thinking like that. I hated bullies. And I remember my mom brought my mom brought my poor brother down to the basement, and some asshole had put a noose on the pipes. And my mom brought my grandfather down just to see us wrestling, but there was this noose that was hanging on the pipes, and my grandfather was so upset that someone put a noose on the pipe. And then he saw us playing with the noose, so my brother was fooling around with the noose around his neck, and my fucking grandfather went in there and said, hey, my dad's and grandfather's kind of guy that if you're playing with fire, they're going to burn you with a match. And if you're playing with a fucking noose, somebody's getting hung for a few seconds so you can see what it's like. And he put my brother in the noose and fucking kicked the thing out from underneath, and my brother got hung for about 10 seconds just to see. And holy shit, my mom ran over there and said, but man, he taught us we never played at that fucking noose again. And I remember I never played with fire after my dad burned me. And I just thought to myself, I'm like, my grandfather doesn't play around. He wants to show you something. He's going to show you the fucking best way to learn that lesson. And he wants that lesson to be something you keep for the rest of your life. And it just was but he was one of those guys that would give you the shirt off his back, and he let anybody in his house. And he loved teaching people professional wrestling, obviously, but he loved teaching the shoot holds way, way, way more than anything. He was a shooter, and he loved pro wrestling because it fed his family, and it was an intricate art at that time of kind of doing both. It wasn't just the pro wrestling; it was a combination of both those arts put together. And being well versed in amateur wrestling and shoot fighting made you a much more efficient pro wrestler. And that was the whole point of being a pro wrestler, was you're supposed to be a shooter first, and then you learned all this stuff. Then you become a pro wrestler, so you have an affinity for what's going on in the ring, and you have an idea and a basis for what's this whole thing about. It's the evolution of fixed fighting back in the day, and they were fixing fights a bit way back in the 1900s, 1920, 1930, but it had to look so stiff. And the shooters had to be so good that you could never call it because there was no cameras and no fucking instant replays and all that shit. You got the guys sitting right at the front of the thing. So, I mean, if you're pulling punches and doing bad wrestling, they're going to catch it. And that was the big thing about making it look real, because at that stage, they were selling it as real. So you sell something as real, it better look fucking real. And if that's your job, is to create an illusion, then those guys were master magicians.
King, you kind of alluded to what Teddy was talking about earlier, that wrestling is not the same. It's kind of a lost art. It's more entertainment now than ever has been before. Is there any way that, say, Triple H could just kind of flip the script and try to make it more of a combat based, a little bit based in reality, and try to make it more of a sport? Or do you think that's just... You think that?
Well, the best thing for Triple H to do, and this is something that we're marketing to potentially to NWA, Impact, AEW, and if WWE were to jump on it, is to bring in our 4-man shoot pro wrestling tournaments, because we have done 4 shows already in the can, and we're bringing that to Great North Wrestling. We'd love to get WWE to do that and actually have a shoot champion and a shoot pro wrestling 4-man tournament on their existing shows. But, also we just had Jerry Briscoe on the show on Old School Shooters, and I've known Jerry for quite a long time. He actually recruited a guy, Tim Dudley, that I had coached, that went on to wrestle in Nebraska. He was one of the best in the country. He kind of had that look like The Rock. And he didn't really have an interest. He wanted to go on to a career in law, actually. And he kind of declined. But Jerry Briscoe's got a lot of studs that he's brought and recruited from the amateur wrestling mats to WWE now. So if they did like a shoot champion, and Jake Shannon is the man. I mean, Jake Shannon is a fantastic businessman and promoter, and I think that what's going on now. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I'm a spokesman for a fighters' rights organization, and there's going to be a shitstorm coming towards the current and past owners of UFC over CTE, and the whole idea of a shoot pro wrestling is great because it combines the exciting elements of shoot without all the massive head trauma. That's a very personal issue for me because I was cornering a fighter in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, back in 2011 when he never fought. He was supposed to be in the main event, and we were in the back, and a guy who had just fought dropped dead just a few feet from me. And the fans went crazy and rioted. I'm not really a big fan of a lot of MMA fans. Not all MMA fans, but a lot of MMA fans are bloodthirsty, bloodlust people. And I'd love to see more of a shoot pro wrestling, even on the WWE brand, because it would be great for them, because it would be a way for them to capture. They allow with Endeavor, the current owners of UFC, they allow their fighters to compete in grappling outside of the UFC because it's a different model now. They have so many signed fighters that are signed at the UFC that they don't use regularly. So we've got some of those guys competing on our shoot pro wrestling format. Some guys that are low to mid card UFC fighters. So to bring that to a brand like a WWE or to any professional wrestling company would help bring them the shoot aspect. Because to me, professional wrestling these days should be like a variety show, and you can't have that variety show without having the shoot aspect included.
You don't think that would expose wrestling for being that much of a entertainment?
Let's turn back the clock. Remember Brawl for All?
Yeah.
Didn't that expose it?
True. Good point.
Yeah. So I think it's
exposed for a while.
What's that?
Yeah, the whole point I think of everything we're saying is that it's been exposed. It's been exposed for so long, and I'm a big believer in putting the genie back in the bottle, and you can put the genie back in the bottle with shoot pro wrestling. We're already putting the genie back in the bottle. We had a tag team tournament that was all shoot with shoot pro. And we've got guys, we've got UFC fighters, we've got top Division I wrestlers, we have high rollers grapplers, which is the league that Stephan Bonner was calling out in Vegas just before he passed. Like I said, Bonner and I were very, very close, and he was supposed to come on board with Forrest Griffin. They just did the show. They just did the ad for us with shoot, and we had some great stuff planned this year that unfortunately, with Bonner's unfortunate passing, we're going to have to kind of adjust. But yeah, man, shoot pro is, I think is the future of pro wrestling, because people want to see stuff that they know is a work, but we'll bring the shoot to the work, and we'll put the genie back in the bottle.
I love the concept. I think it would actually, spice things up, because, wrestling nowadays is kind of hard to watch. It's not the same thing we're used to back in the, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And if you want to go as far as AEW, I don't know if you watch any of that, but there's a lot of booking that Tony Khan does that doesn't make sense. And sometimes it's too over the top, and there's too many high spots, or you're watching guys waiting for other guys to get up to the top, and so you can catch them. It's like the mystique is completely gone. nowadays.
Yeah, you can bring it back. I mean, you can bring that mystique back with a shoot pro wrestling, and we could do. God, I have a different view of pro wrestling because when I was doing pro wrestling, when I lived in South Carolina, there was a guy out in Boiling Springs, which is out in the sticks and up in the upstate, who his name was Jerry Bragg. His shoot name was Chief J Eagle, and he used to do this thing only like 11, 12 years ago on Wednesday nights, which was you want to be a wrestler, and he had a guy who looked like nothing. The guy was 145 pounds, soaking wet. He had been a coach at Davidson College up in North Carolina. But he had also been a national champion in amateur wrestling. He wrestled out of UNC. His name was TJ, and they used to put him in. First, they were doing it with me and a guy named Chuck Sloan, but we were too big, and guys kind of knew our reputation. So he was doing the old thing where you pay and we run you off. But then he got smart and he started doing it with TJ. And he'd have guys pay their money Wednesday, and TJ would just chew these guys up, and he'd hurt them.
Yeah.
And they go back and they tell people, this was only 11, 12 years ago, man. That's what professional wrestling is to me, man. Professional wrestling to me needs to be respected. And you put me in the ring with anybody right now, feed me any marks right now, I'll teach him respect for the damn business. I'll send him home, and I'll hurt him. And that's what professional wrestling is supposed to be. I still feel that it should be professional wrestling.
I agree. And, that's kind of how it was back in the day when you wanted to get into the business or you thought you could be a wrestler, and, guys would stretch them, just to show him that, oh man, that stuff isn't, it's initiation. That stuff isn't fake. And you go back and tell your friends, yeah, man, they beat the shit out of me. Like, that shit's for real.
I think that hammerlock that Pat Sajak put on that contestant the other night on Wheel of Fortune was stiffer and better executed than most of the moves you see on TV now. Did you see that?
I did.
Sajak snuck up behind the guy, slapped him in a hammerlock. And I think that was because they're doing WrestleMania week next week. Yep. But yeah, man, I think that we have to put the genie back in the bottle, man, for professional wrestling, and there's different styles of matches, but we can't lose sight of the history, and the history is the shoot style.
Thanks for listening to Rebuilding the Foundation with Teddy Hart. To keep up with the latest happenings with Teddy, follow him on Instagram at official Teddy Hart. You can also email us at rebuildingthefoundationpodcast@gmail.com. Join us next time for Rebuilding the Foundation with Teddy Hart, right here on the Rad Rob Radio Network.